Every real estate listing has the same lie baked into it. Charming 1920s foundation, original hardwood, full of character. What they mean is this house is a coffin with good bones, and nobody's told you who's still in it. Tonight, we're not talking about ghosts who rattle change for attention. We're talking about the ones who don't want to be found because somebody already tried very, very hard to make sure that the relatives who got quietly erased from the family Bible, the names nobody says at Thanksgiving, the ones who didn't get a headstone, because a headstone is a receipt. And some families do not want a paper trail. We're going to pull up the floorboards tonight, literally. And I need you to understand some of what we find is going to have teeth in it. I mean that literally too. This is the Phantom Navigator. Lock the door. Actually, don't. It won't help. Here's a sentence I want stuck in your head for the rest of this episode. Some houses aren't haunted. Some houses are held up. We treat a home like it's dead weight. Brick, drywall, a mortgage, static. But ask literally any contractor and they'll tell you a house is closer to a body than a box. It expands in the heat. It contracts in the cold. It groans at night because it's settling, the same way your knees do now that you're an adult with responsibilities. The mistake? The fatal mistake, frankly, is assuming the load-bearing weight in your house is just timber and nails. Because in a disturbing number of homes built before, say, 1950, the thing holding the structure together emotionally and in a few genuinely horrifying cases, literally, is a person your family decided to forget. Not someone who died tragically and got mourned, someone who got subtracted. An illegitimate child. A relative with a mental illness nobody had the vocabulary or the compassion for. Someone who broke a taboo so unspeakable, the family didn't bury the shame. They buried the person's name, while the person themselves stayed exactly where they'd always been, upstairs, in the attic, in a room nobody mentions, in a grave with no marker on the edge of the property line. You dismantle a wall in one of these houses and you're not doing home renovations. You're performing an unlicensed exhumation. Congratulations, you're a grave robber. Now, you just don't get a cool hat. And here's the part that should be bothering you already. If the reason the house still feels heavy isn't a haunting, if it's just the unprocessed weight of a secret nobody had the guts to say out loud, then the difference between a ghost story and a family history is a lot smaller than anyone wants to admit. Let's dig. Sorry, poor choice of words. Let's dig anyways. Before we get to the relatives nobody talks about, we need to talk about why people started hiding things, objects, not yet bodies, inside their walls in the first place. Because this isn't folklore invented for a podcast. This is documented, excavated, sitting in a museum case right now, history. Across ancient and medieval Europe, there's a practice archaeologists call boapfer. The foundation, sacrifice. The belief was blunt and terrifying. A structure cannot simply stand on inert material. It needs something alive, or something that was once alive, buried at its foundation to anchor it spiritually. Early instances involved actual sacrifice. Later, thankfully, humanity evolved slightly and it became about proxies, objects standing in for a life. Which brings us to my personal favorite category of things people used to hide in walls, and I cannot believe this is what was normal. Witch bottles. In 2004, archaeologists in Greenwich, London, pulled an intact 17th century stoneware jug out of the ground, buried upside down under a house threshold. This thing had been sitting there since roughly 1680. They ran it through CT scans, chemical analysis, and inside, perfectly preserved for over 3 centuries, was human hair, fingernail clippings, a piece of leather pierced clean through with a brass pin, bent iron nails, and, I want you to sit with this one, human urine, which tested positive for cotinine, which meaning whoever contributed was a smoker. In the 1680s, the forensic receipt on this thing is insane. The logic was sympathetic, magic. Hair, nails, and bodily fluid carried your literal essence. Bury the bottle under the threshold or the hearth, and it becomes a decoy. Anything malicious trying to get into the house gets lured into the jar instead of the person. And then the iron nails and pins inside shred it. It's a haunted house alarm system built out of a Victorian's fingernails. No monthly subscription fee, just eternal spiritual commitment. The Northampton Museum in the UK maintains something called the Concealed Shoe Index, official documentation for over 1,900 individually recorded instances of shoes deliberately sealed inside the walls of historic homes across the UK, Europe, and New England. Not pairs, almost always a single shoe, heavily worn, and this is the detail that ruins my whole week, nearly half of them belong to children. Why a shoe? Because leather shoes hold shape, it holds sweat, it holds the literal physical impressions of the foot that wore it. Long after the person who wore it is gone, builders and homeowners treated it as permanent stand-in for a person, sealed into a chimney breast, a window frame, under a floorboard, to serve as guardian or decoy or tether if you left. If you left or if you died, your shoe stayed behind to keep guarding the door. So next time you're mid-renovations and you find one lonely little kid's shoe wedged behind a wall stud, do not throw it out. You are not doing your house a favor. You're firing your security guard. Now, here's where it stops being about shoes and bottles. Because if families were willing to brick a shoe into the wall to keep something bound to the house forever, what do you think they did with an actual person they were desperate to make disappear? For most of documented history, family was a public performance, and the family Bible was a press release. Births, marriages, deaths, written in by hand, displayed, referenced for generations. It was your official cast list. And plenty of people never made the cut. Illegitimate children, relatives with severe, untreated mental illness, before anyone had the language or the compassion to call it anything other than the family shame. People who broke a taboo so severe the family decided the only acceptable response was total erasure, not just socially, but administratively. No entry in the Bible, no name in the census, no public burial. But here's the thing about erasing a person. It turns out to be a lot harder than erasing a name. Historical records, and this part's well documented, show families confining unwanted relatives to attics or back bedrooms or basement rooms, or sometimes for decades, living, breathing people, fed, kept alive, kept completely invisible to neighbors and extended family. Maintaining a spotless public face for a household that was structurally built around a hidden human being. And when they died, no churchyard, no headstone with their name carved where a passerby might read it and ask questions. Instead, an unmarked plot right there on the property, sometimes barely dug, sometimes closer to the foundation than anyone would like to think about, which means the family successfully erased them from every legal document that ever existed. While their physical remains stayed permanently, geographically, undeniably tethered to the exact same plot of land that the family kept living on. You can burn a birth certificate. You cannot unbury a body from underneath your own kitchen. So when a contractor tears out a wall in a house like this and finds a hidden tooth, a lock of hair, a shape in the soil that's a little too regular to be natural, that's not a ghost story. That's the last surviving piece of paperwork for a person whose entire legal existence was deleted by people who were supposed to love them. The house didn't forget them. The house is the only thing that couldn't. Okay, here's where I need you to put your phone down, because this is the part of the episode where I ruin your relationship with your own habits. There's a phenomenon gaining traction in modern psychical research called the third resident. The idea when you move into an old house, you're never just moving in as yourself. There's person A, you, the current living occupant. There's person B, whoever lived there before, whose routine wore physical grooves into the space over years or decades. And then there's person C, the third resident, a strange composite that forms when your body quietly starts running somebody else's code. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't start with a shadow in the hallway. It starts small. Phase 1, spatial priming. You find yourself standing in a corner of a room for no reason, leaning against a door jamb at a specific angle, the exact angle worn into the wood by 40 years of somebody else's shoulder. It doesn't feel like being controlled. It feels correct, comfortable, like the room is telling your body where to stand, and your body's just agreeing. Phase 2, motor imprinting. You start waking up at 3:14 a.m. every night for no reason you can name to check a pantry door that used to lead to a cellar that was sealed up decades before you were born. You develop a craving you've never had before. You start stirring your coffee a specific direction. You start locking a deadbolt in a three-beat rhythm you never taught yourself. Phase 3, and this is the one that should actually alarm you. Identity bleed. You start feeling emotions that don't belong to you. A grief with no source. A resentment you can't trace to anything in your own life. And then, months later, you find an old photograph of the person who died in your bedroom decades before you moved in. And they've got the exact same scar on their thumb that you do from opening the exact same stuck window. You weren't being haunted. You're being quietly overwritten. There are 3 competing theories for why this happens, and I generally don't think any of them are comforting. 1, somatic morphic resonance. The idea that decades of the same motion in the same coordinates leaves the invisible organizing field in the physical space itself, and your nervous system just tunes into the station that's already playing. 2, the eDNA theory, which is real, published, peer-reviewed. Science, not spooky nonsense, porous plaster and floorboards genuinely absorb decades of human genetic material. Skin cells, sweat, hair, and some researchers speculate that inhaling that biological dust for years could subtly nudge your neurology toward the person who left it there. 3, the boring, deeply unsettling one. It's just your own brain doing exactly what brains do, constantly reading the wear patterns. The hollowed stair tread, the discoloration on the wall, and unconsciously builds a script from it, then quietly making your body perform it. Comforting or not, here's a sentence that should be ringing in your ears right now. You think you're making choices in your own home? You might just be keeping somebody else's habits warm. Now I want you to zoom all the way out because everything we've talked about tonight, the buried shoes, the erased names, the body that isn't yours running your own muscles, all of it collapses into one idea, and it's the one I actually think is the scariest thing in this entire episode. Psychoanalysis, Nicolas Abraham and Mária Török had a term for this, the phantom. Here's the theory. When a family goes through something shameful or traumatic, an unacknowledged such as an unacknowledged life ending, a secret child, financial ruin, abuse, and the family's response is silence instead of processing it. That secret doesn't just disappear, it gets sealed away in what Abraham and Török call a psychological crypt. The secret itself never gets spoken, but the behavior around it does. The tension, the topic everyone goes quiet on, the room nobody mentions. And that behavior gets passed down, not the facts, just a shape of avoidance, to children who never experience the original event and have no idea what they're carrying. The child senses a void, a gap in the story that doesn't add up. And so the child starts acting out the role of the ghost. Unexplained grief, night terrors, fears with no origin story. To everyone watching, including the kid, it looks exactly like a haunting. But it's not a spirit haunting that child. It's their parents' unspoken words. And here's where it collapses back into everything we've talked about tonight. Look at the parallel. A cold spot with no thermodynamic explanation. That's just what an emotionally frozen topic feels like in a room. A poltergeist smashing a plate? That's what unprocessed tension looks like when it finally erupts as a screaming match nobody saw coming. A shadow that vanishes the second you look directly at it? That's a hyper-vigilant person bracing for a truth they've sensed their whole life but were never handed the words for. The house isn't separate from the secret. The house is the secret, wearing drywall. And the fix for both is identical, and it's almost insultingly simple. The thing that has to be named out loud. A ghost loses its power the exact second somebody says what it actually is. A family secret loses its grip on the next generation the exact second somebody finally says the sentence nobody's been allowed to say. Whether that scratching behind your wall is an unrecorded ancestor or just the physical weight of a truth your family's been sitting on for 3 generations. The cure is the same. Say the name out loud in the room. Let the house finally exhale. One more thing before I let you go, because I think this is the most 2026 sentence I will say all year. We used to sit with 50 hours of magnetic tape hiss, straining our ears for one cracked whisper. Back when EVP research meant an old cassette recorder and a lot of patience. Now we don't even listen anymore. We hand the static straight to a neutral network. Here's the part nobody talks about. When you feed pure noise, HVAC hum, a settling floorboard, dead air, into a modern AI transcription model, it does not return silence. It can't. It's built to predict the most statistically likely words a human would say. So when there's no acoustic signal at all, the model doesn't shrug, it guesses. And it guesses using the 10,000 hours of human conversation it was trained on. Which is how you end up with a transcript generated from an empty, silent kitchen that reads, I am still standing here. That's not a ghost reaching across the veil. That's a machine so structurally incapable of tolerating silence that it invented a person to fill it, just so it wouldn't have to return nothing. Make of that what you will. I have thoughts. They're not comforting, though. Moving on. So here's what I actually want you to take with you tonight. Every house you've ever lived in is a living museum, and you are never its only curator. It's holding the biological salt of everyone who leaned against that wall before you. It's holding the acoustic memory of every footstep that ever wore down that stair. It's holding names some family, somewhere, decided weren't allowed to be said out loud anymore. And it held onto them anyway. Because unlike people, a house doesn't get to choose what it forgets. So the next time a floorboard creaks with nobody standing on it, don't call an exorcist. Don't call a contractor. Ask who used to stand there and say their name. Because the house was never haunting you. It was just waiting for somebody to finally remember. This has been the Phantom Navigator. Lock your doors, check your walls, and maybe, just maybe, ask your grandmother one more question before it's too late to get the real answer.